looking at taking a closer look at demand curves and their shape and what their shape tells us about the nature of the product. Let me just finish putting a little bit more detail on here. We've talked about the responsiveness to price that consumers have, meaning that if price changes, how's that likely to affect the quantity they choose to consume? And we're talking about now in the aggregate looking at all consumers. Well, we actually have a measure for that, and we can actually measure how much the quantity changes given a change in price. And we could just simply make a ratio, the change in quantity or the change in price. That's the delta means change. But we want to be sure that we're making comparisons that make sense. So we actually look at the percentage change in quantity or the percentage change in price. Scales on the units could be all over the place. So just simply looking at the change in quantity or the change in price doesn't give us an accurate comparison. For example, houses might cost $1 million, but we might be dealing with quantities of 1, 2, 3, 4 houses. An iTunes download costs 99 cents, but we could be looking at quantities of 1, 2, 3, 4 million. So in order to get a sense of, to get a number that gives us a good comparison, we have to take percentage changes. We have to take percentage changes into account. So this curve here, we look and we see that if the price drops, we're going to get an expansion of output. But relatively speaking, the price drops quite a bit and the output does not expand that much. That's what we would call inelastic demand. Inelastic demand. In other words, elastic, stretchy, think stretchy, that the stretchy is responsive. The quantity demanded isn't going to change very much if the price changes. Over here we see as the price changes, the quantity demanded changes quite a bit. We call that elastic demand. In other words, the relative quantity demanded, the relative change in quantity demanded is greater than the relative change in price. The relative change in quantity demanded is less than the relative change in price. Why is knowing elasticity of demand helpful for us? Well, when we think of, say, governments and they want to levy taxes, so they want to get people to stop smoking. So, well, if we increase the price, are we going to get a sufficient, but taxing, that's what taxes do, is increase the price. Are we going to get a sufficient reduction in the quantity of cigarettes consumed? Elasticity of cigarettes would allow us to know whether we would or not. Maybe a business is interested in pricing strategies. Let's run a 10% sale. What is that going to do to the quantity demanded of the product? We want to expand total revenue. Maybe should we increase the price or decrease the price? How do we do that to get a greater sense of get greater total revenue? So whenever you might want to know, if I change the price, what happens to the quantity demanded? Then we could, like in the case of taxes or pricing for a business, then elasticity will help us figure that out. This is a relatively inelastic demand curve. This is a relatively elastic demand curve. Now, we can treat the curve as inelastic or elastic, but to be very technical about it, elasticity, the amount of elasticity in a curve will vary along the curve. Okay, because the curves aren't actually flat. We draw them as flat, but they're not actually flat usually. But in any case, you should be aware of the fact that elasticity can vary along a demand curve. But that's all. You don't need to know any more about it than that. It will vary along a demand curve. We can treat a steep curve as inelastic and a shallow curve as elastic. We don't even have to really look at the curves. If we know a product is fairly inelastic, if we have a situation where we say we have inelastic demand for a product, then we know that changes in price are not going to affect changes in quantity that much. If we just know that we have elastic demand, we know that changes in price are going to affect changes in output quite a bit.